Welcome to Lecture 8, which is titled Freight Movement. Today's lecture builds on the discussion in Module 2 about how customs agencies are modifying their approach to global trade movements to address issues such as security, trade and technology challenges that they face in today's globalised environment. The approach taken by modern customs agencies like Australia is commonly referred to as trade facilitation, an approach to border control that involves the simplification, harmonisation and standardisation of trade procedures. For freight forwarders, having an understanding of trade facilitation is very helpful, as it is an approach that contributes to the efficiency of the movement of goods and, importantly, can lead to a reduction in trade transaction costs incurred due to the government legislation or regulation, such as the cost of inspection and testing of materials and goods. So today's lecture will touch on a number of issues. It'll speak about how the agenda of the World Trade Organization has encompassed the trade facilitation. We'll also talk about supply chain security initiatives, excuse me, and also shipper capacity building programs and many customs modernisation programs that all perform a role in minimising trade transaction costs. It's worthy to note that despite the efforts at modernisation of customs agencies, the implementation of trade facilitation programs, codes and frameworks is often fraught with obstacles such as conflicting interests, institutional limitations and lack of knowledge. So this module will help you to develop an understanding on how the changing pattern of trade is impacting on trade and border control activities and the strategies that a modern customs organisation is using to mitigate that situation. The module will conclude with a discussion on supply chain visibility, which is an approach by shippers and freight forwarders to improve and strengthen the awareness of and control over specific information relating to product orders and physical shipments. It's particularly relevant to transport and logistics activities and the statuses of events and milestones that occur prior to and in transit of an international consignment. Given increased supply chain visibility has the potential to provide shippers and freight forwarders with assisting in a comparative advantage in distribution over its competition, freight forwarders have an important role in achieving this particular goal. So our focus questions today will be, what is trade facilitation and what is its relevance to supply chains, customs activities and the World Customs Organization? What is supply chain security? Why is supply chain security important to businesses, freight forwarders and government? What is a layered approach to border and supply chain security? And what is supply chain visibility and why is it important to business? Now, our readings this week come from Granger, Donner and Cruck and Healy. So the first question that I want to discuss today is, what is trade facilitation and what is its relevance to supply chains, customs activities and the World Customs Organization? So I wanted to start by giving you two definitions of this term, trade facilitation. The first one is from the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and it states that trade facilitation is the simplification and harmonization of international trade procedures, with trade procedures being the activities, practices and formalities involved in collecting, presenting, communications and process data required for the movement of goods in international trade. The second definition is from the UN CEFACT, an acronym which stands for the United Nations Centre for Trade Facilitation. And they state that trade facilitation is the simplification, standardisation and harmonisation of procedures and associated information flows required to move goods from the seller and to the buyer and to make payment. So the importance of trade facilitation shouldn't really be underestimated, as it has benefits to all stakeholders in the international community, whether they're exporters and importers who are parties to the international shipment, whether they're freight forwarders who facilitate the shipment, and the government agencies such as customs that are charged with overseeing the movement of goods across international borders. So for their part, customs organisations are responsible for implementing a wide range of border management policies that are dictated by the government of the country. Historically, customs organisations' responsibilities have included revenue collection, such as VAT, value-added tax, excise duties and tariffs. Also responsible for trade compliance and facilitation, such as review of bilateral agreement outcomes. For example, free trade agreements may reduce tariffs. Also the oversight of intellectual property, as well as copyright and trademark laws, as well as review documentation in relation to export and import goods. They're also involved with the interception of contraband and prohibited substances, which could be the smuggling of illicit goods, it could be undocumented dangerous goods, as well as immigration and border control. In addition to this, they're responsible for consumer protection, both from an export and import perspective. And this includes things like overseeing product testing, making sure that labelling is correct, and also ensuring a conformity with approved marketing standards. In addition to this, they have an oversight over environment and also health concerns, such as ensuring the correct documentation of prescribed goods. Now, for example, plants and plant products usually require a phytosanitary certificate. It's up to them to ensure that that's consistent with the going regulation. Also, veterinary and hygiene controls that might cover export premises and other health and safety measures, as well as the monitoring of marine pollution. Customs agencies either take the sole lead in regards to those responsibilities, or they share these border management responsibilities with other government agencies, which in many ways and can add to the complexity of the task confronting them. So, as a consequence of an unprecedented growth in international trade, which has been the result of a number of things, transportation advantages, changes in international trade arrangements, the move towards the usage of global value chains, and more recently the growth of e-commerce. These things have evolved over a period of 30 years. Modernisation of the traditional role performed by customs is inevitable. And the adoption of a trade facilitation approach by customs agencies is leading to this modernisation. And this comes through the simplification of international trade procedures such as regulation, licensing and transit formalities, and other customs admin processes that can reduce the speed of movement of goods across the border. So, trade facilitation is centred around three main principles. The first one being simplification. Simplification refers to the process of eliminating all unnecessary elements and duplications in the country's customs formalities, processes and procedures. Harmonisation, which is the alignment of a country's customs formalities, processes and procedures with international conventions, standards and practices. For example, aligning with the policies and principles of the World Customs Organization. And the other third main principle is this idea of standardisation. So standardisation in a trade facilitation context refers to the process of developing internationally agreed formats for practices and procedures, documents and information that facilitates opportunities to harmonise formalities between countries. In other words, two countries agreeing to similar procedures, documents and information. Now, this diagram from the reading by Granger shows the convergence of the physical operation and the regulatory operation in a typical trade transaction between two countries, country A and country B. The physical operations being the domain of the seller and buyer or their agent, the freight forwarder, that involves coordination of things such as packing, warehousing, various transport mode coordination, and other services to move the goods to the final destination. From a regulatory point of view, this encompasses revenue collection associated with taxes and tariffs, safety and security of shippers and the general public, environment and health concerns, consumer protection, and other administration of a wide range of trade policy rules, such as dealing with quota restrictions and dumping. Now, compliance with customs procedures demands a great deal of coordination between freight forwarders and other stakeholders involved in moving the goods. From the seller and the buyer or the freight forwarder is likely to undertake some or all of the physical operations in country A. And in country B, the buyer's country, whether both the seller and the buyer are involved or the freight forwarder is involved, will likely come down to the sales contract and the associated Incoterm. Now, at each stage of the movement of the different types of data are generally generated and different types of information are submitted to customs. and other government agencies, both from country A and country B. We can see there. So a trade facilitation approach recognises that inadequacy or contradictory documentation, congestion at inspection facilities, and labour-intensive activities such as cargo inspection can lead to transaction costs that are wasteful and undesirable, not only for shippers and freight forwarders, but also for government or the customs agency themselves. So, when it comes to putting trade facilitation on the global agenda of governments, most of the work in this area has been done by the World Customs Organization, or the WCO, whose mission is to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of customs administrations in a variety of countries. Now, this particular organisation was established in 1952, so it's been going for about 65 years. It's an independent intergovernmental body that represents 183 customs administrations across the globe. And these customs administrations collectively process approximately 98% of world trade. As the global centre of customs expertise, the WCO is the only international organisation with competence in customs matters and can rightly call itself the voice of the international customs community. However, despite their concerted efforts, the WCO has over time only made incremental progress in raising the profile of trade facilitation until the World Trade Organization, in some ways a sister organisation, but certainly having a more significant remit in the area of trade, significantly elevated the issue of trade facilitation by including it as a substantial feature within its Doha trade round of trade negotiations in 2001. So, since 2001, it's had a heightened level of recognition within governments as perhaps an opportunity to improve the processes between countries in regards to the movement of trade. Now, within WT negotiations, trade facilitation currently falls under 3 articles, Articles 5, 8 and 10, and that's under its own General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade articles. And it addresses issues such as freedom of transport, fees and formalities, and publication and administration of trade regulation, which are all of direct relevance to the customs world, as we can see by having a look at Table 3. Now, the WTO's rationale behind elevating trade facilitation is to ease customs procedures and to facilitate the movement, release and clearance of goods, which places it in an important addition to its overall negotiation agenda. So from their perspective, they can see how a level of attention on trade facilitation is likely to lead to a cut in bureaucracy and corruption in customs procedures, which will have a net result of not only speeding up trade, but also making it cheaper. Now, trade facilitation itself has got a pretty broad application across logistics. And we can see similar themes also found in global security concerns. So security has got some consistencies in regards to the issues that it's dealing with, including issues around the introduction of advanced notification of shipments, the usage of more targeted controls, the use of new technologies in physical inspections, so the use of scanners, for example, as well as reporting procedures and gaining access to information generated up and down the supply chain through the greater use of IT systems. Now, some trade facilitations are also part of supply chain security considerations, such as the use of risk management techniques, the development of partnership programs, preferential treatment of authorised firms and individuals, standardisation of data requirements, and cooperation and mutual recognition of controls between agencies and governments. In addition to this, the replacement of paper documents with the use of electronic reporting systems. Now, a good example of that is employed by the Australian government in the Department of Agriculture, Water and Resources. They use a software application which is called Xdoc, and this is to manage and generate export documentation, permits and certificates for exporters and freight forwarders. The department also offers a single electronic window which can generate export declaration numbers necessary for the integrated cargo system, customs clearance. So they've managed to achieve a marrying up, if you like, a synchronisation between two systems operated by two different government departments. Okay, so our next two questions we're going to look at are why is supply chain security important to businesses, freight forwarders and government, and what is the layered approach to border and supply chain security. So, building on the discussion on trade facilitation, I wanted to expand on another important considerations by governments and customs agencies, specifically security in the supply chain. In other words, taking a modern approach to security, which is concerned with the following 5 elements. Firstly, the early detection of threats, and this is done through timely acquisition, analysis and validation of cargo information by the relevant government agencies, so using advanced cargo information broadcast and a consistent risk management system. Another approach is the certification and credentialing of parties in the supply chain, such as freight forwarders, to ensure that only legitimate bona fide entities with an adequate security awareness and self-discipline actively participate in the supply chain. Now, for that to occur requires that mechanisms are in place for the mutual recognition between different governments of their respective certification programs. For example, the Australian Trusted Trader program, which is allocated into Australia and directed at shippers and freight forwarders, has allowed them access to a streamlined customs process in Singapore and other countries. Now, the modern approach to security also implies that sustainable technology to enable enforcement agencies to increase screening and examination of increased flows of legitimate trade. Also, the improvement of cargo and container integrity during the whole transport cycle, centred on things such as cargo seals, track and trace, and positioning and scanning technology. And finally, another area that involves security and it's got a crossover with trade facilitation is taking underpinned by having a strong set of international regulations covering the tracking of vessels at sea, the interface between merchant vessels and ports, and also the security of the port facilities. Now, these 5 elements form what we call a multi-layered approach to security, and it's supported by most global government supply chain security agencies, as well as the World Customs Organization themselves. Now, what does that look like? It looks something like this. This slide shows a diagram that represents this multi-layered approach to dealing with security for an international consignment of goods from the seller to the buyer. The respective layers that we can see in the diagram are represented by a variety of government programs, codes and frameworks, some of which are compulsory, some of which are voluntary. Each of the programs, codes and frameworks focus on different stages of the supply chain, such as those programs which are directed at early detection, other programs directed at certification credentialing, other programs that use scanning technology are also that could be directed at container integrity, or are concerned with international ship and port security and vessel tracking programs. So, as you can see, this program provides almost an all-encompassing assessment of the cargo as it moves through the chain, ensuring that security does not rely on any single stage that might become compromised. The idea here is that the layers complement each other and they reinforce the entirety of the secure supply chain. Now, this multi-layered approach is based on a combination of elements that also complement trade facilitation, such as advanced cargo information. Now, advanced cargo information is the collection of information about cargo consignments before the containers and goods reach the port of destination. So, in many ways, it gives the customs authorities prior knowledge of the what type of goods and the expectations of what might be in that container. Now, that provides the customs agency with an opportunity to pre-screen imported goods and make informed targeting and intervention decisions, thereby concentrating their resources on high-risk issues and cargoes, and allowing the vast majority of cargo to move through customs unimpeded. Another key element of this multi-layered approach is this idea of risk management. So, an example of a risk management technique is actually the one that I just referred to, advanced cargo information. So, this is taking a risk management approach. So it gives the opportunity to management to focus on using measures that limit exposure to a risk or likelihood of an event that might result in a negative or unwanted outcome. Another key element of this multi-layered approach is non-intrusive inspection. And that relates to issues around container security and scanning of its contents. So this approach entails inspection and identification of goods in supply chain without time-intensive unloading process. So it's using those scanning technologies to view what's in the container without the need to open it up. Also, in this process is an operator's certification. So that's authorizing operators, freight forwarders and shippers. An example of that is the Authorized Economic Operator Program, and it relates to a situation where a freight forwarder who is involved in international movement of goods is approved on behalf of the Customs Authority as complying with the World Customs Organization or an equivalent supply chain security standard. Now, the approval is given to provide reliable traders and freight forwarders with trade facilitation measures. Those sort of measures would include getting the privileged green lane treatment at the border, resulting in faster clearance and less frequent inspections as an incentive for their compliance. So, in an effort to demonstrate how the multi-layered approach works, this diagram shows a number of global government security programs, codes and frameworks, and their focus on different stages of the supply chain. So if we look at early detection programs, we can see that the programs that we've got listed under here are the 24-hour manifest program, the 10+2, advanced cargo information, and also risk management. In terms of certification and credentialing programs, we've got the Authorised Economic Trader, and in Australia, the name of that particular program is called the Australian Trusted Trader. We've also got scanning technology programs such as scanning shipments. And we've also got container integrity program. So we're talking about things such as seals and other technologies, perhaps even RFID to keep track of the goods as they move through the supply chain. The last one deals with the interaction between the ship and port security and vessel tracking programs. And we can see them in the middle. So that's mainly dealing with when the goods are on the water itself. Now, the three programs that you can see there are acronyms for programs. The AIS stands for Auto Identification System. Now, this is a maritime communications device that improves navigation safety and environmental protection by assisting in the effective navigation of ships. The other program there, the ISPS, stands for International Ship and Port Facility Security, which is a comprehensive set of measures to enhance the security of ships and port facilities. And the other program there involved in this layered approach is the LRIT, which stands for Long Range Identification and Tracking. And this is a program designed to collect and disseminate vessel position information received from IMO member ship states. This final diagram cross-references the program's codes and frameworks to the stakeholder involved in the program's implementation. So we can see, firstly, for shippers, consignees and forwarders, they're involved in those programs that you can see on your screen. The ports and customs are involved here. Government is involved at that stage. Shipping lines are involved, as well as NVOCC is involved there. And finally, we've got the ship owner and flag state vessel. So as you can see, depending on who you might be as a stakeholder in the movement of goods from the seller to the buyer, there is some form of program designed to better facilitate and oversee the security issues in that regard. Now, if we're looking forward into where next with supply chain security, and particularly in regards to the movement of an international consignment, what we'd say is that there's no single approach to supply chain security. However, you can see from the previous slides, as a consequence of having a multitude of codes, frameworks, and programs that govern them, it's likely the best option to maintain a level of integrity in the system. Also, the World Customs Organization continues to work with countries and also the World Trade Organization to shape the future supply chain programs, and has developed a comprehensive framework which they call the Safe Framework of Standards. In other words, it's a best practice of standards that countries can adopt to better deal with supply chain security concerns. It's worth mentioning that not all programs that a government comes up with is going to meet the Safe Framework of Standards. And a good example of this is in the United States, not long after the 9/11 terrorism attacks, legislation was passed that 100%, the name of the program was the 100% scanning program. This program required all cargo that moved through customs to be scanned. It was introduced in the early 2000s. It was time for implementation in 2012, and to this date it's yet to be implemented. And that's really mainly due to the likelihood that the movements of cargo through the US border, if they were going to adopt a 100% scanning program, would have come to a standstill. Which does highlight that while this program certainly had the best intentions, it was impractical to implement. Another aspect in regard to security looking forward is that technology continues to perform an important role in security and productivity. It improves data collection, reduces labour costs by streamlining data capture, and reduces error-prone manual processes. Also, mutual recognition between national certification program is probably one of those areas that remains an outstanding objective. Now, however, in a step in the right direction in 2018, Singapore Customs and the Australian Border Force signed an authorised economic operator mutual recognition arrangement, and what that's effectively done is to facilitate trade for certified companies of both countries, so improving the benefits for both Singapore and Australia as goods move through the border due to that mutual recognition. And finally, while there's been significant adoption of, for example, the Authorised Economic Operator Program, to be implemented as per the guidelines of the SAFE program, requires validation by an external third party. And in some cases, that's not as easy as it is to actually implement. This third party may not be available in all countries, and I guess one of the solutions in this regard has been to perhaps consider using a recognised body such as ISO to get them involved in the process. ISO being a body that's probably going to be more accessible to more companies. Now, an example of, I suppose, this attention to the movement of goods and the necessity to work in with a government program and at the same time provide a trade facilitation outcome. I just wanted to round out our discussion on security and its impact on freight forwarders more broadly, to look at a good example of the impact of these security considerations in the movement of freight. Specifically, the impact of changes to Australians' air freight security regulation. So, in 2018, the Australian government announced that they wanted to further strengthen Australia's domestic and international aviation security, and they were going to implement a range of measures in March 2019. Now, the new policy stated that all international air freight exported out of Australia would require to be security screened at peace level by an approved officer, which they referred to as a regulated air cargo agent, or having originated from a known consignor. So this new policy is to ensure that 100% of cargo being loaded onto aircraft from Australia complies with safety measures to keep all users of the aviation industry safe, and also builds on previous arrangements that have already been in place since 2017 with the United States. Mindful that the amount of air cargo going to the United States really only amounted to 5% of the total air cargo shipments. So it was a pretty big jump in terms of volumes that would now need to be scanned at a peace level. So in an effort to mitigate expected delays due to increased screening measures and to maintain its objectives to increase trade facilitation, the government announced two programs. Now, the first program is what is called the Regulated Air Cargo Agent, or RACA scheme. Now, this is designed for firms and freight forwarders that handle or make arrangements to transport outbound international air cargo. As a regulated air cargo agent, the expectation is that the firm will examine and clear international air cargo under the program rules and protect the security of air cargo from the moment received until it leaves their possession, as well as issue a security declaration once cargo has been examined and cleared under the program rules. Now, if a firm or a freight forwarder only seeks to handle or make arrangements to transport the outbound international air cargo, there was a fallback option. So this situation was for those entities that didn't want to examine and clear air cargo. They proposed an alternative scheme called the accredited air cargo agent. The accredited air cargo agent is available, and it's got lower compliance requirements, which suits some parties. The second scheme that they brought in, or second program, if you like, is called the known consignor scheme, that was introduced to help streamline the way goods are cleared for export from Australia, instead of only using the regulated air cargo agent or the accredited air cargo agent to examine and clear air cargo. So known consignors meet and maintain a high level of security to ensure cargo is safe to load onto the aircraft and demonstrate that they have the security measures and procedures in place to secure their cargo from where it originates until it's handed to another regulated business, such as a regulated air cargo agent or an accredited air cargo agent. As a known consignor, the firm must comply with program rules, protect the security of the air cargo at all times, and to issue proof that the cargo is cleared via a security declaration. Now, for those entities eligible to be a known consignor, the firm must be an exporter of export cargo from Australia by air. They need to have an ABN or an ACN. They also need to originate the cargo, know what is in every box, package and carton, and also meet the following. And that is to either make, manufacture, assemble, or otherwise produce the goods to be transported by export, for export by aircraft as cargo. So, for example, this could easily be a business that exports meat or fresh fruit as air cargo, or be the business is the owner or a person such as a freight forwarder who is in control of the goods when they become cargo ready for export by air. In other words, the freight forwarder might be providing a packaging service of goods into the boxes and cargoes and then consolidating them into a consignment on a pallet at its facilities from goods made elsewhere. Now, for those type of businesses, whether you're a freight forwarder or a shipper, if you're already authorised as an Australian trusted trader, it's likely to streamline the application process. And if we remember, the Australian Trusted Trader Program is attractive to freight forwarders and shippers because it reduces red tape. It also improves a level of certainty in export markets, and it expedites the flow of goods in and out of Australia. Okay, so now to our final focus question, and that question is, what is supply chain visibility, and why is it important to shippers and freight forwarders? So, in today's globalised environment, supply chain execution and responsiveness requires a very close oversight of international commerce, including the movement of the goods, the movement of information, and also funds across an increasingly large number of logistics and trading partners spanning wide geographic areas. Now, according to the Aberdeen Group, Supply chain visibility is essential to ensure execution and responsiveness of the supply chain itself. And they go on to define supply chain visibility as the awareness of and control over specific information related to product orders and physical shipments, including transport and logistics activities, and the statuses of events and milestones that occur prior to and also in transit. Now, according to the Aberdeen Group, supply chain visibility is characterized by three features. The first feature is taking a control tower approach, and this is defined as a set of integrated processes and technologies that support a seamless flow of product from the origin to the end customer, regardless of what the global complexities or sales and logistics preferences of customers might be. The second feature of supply chain visibility is this idea of closing the loop between planning and execution and synchronization of end-to-end activities, from raw material to the delivery to the end customer. And a final feature of supply chain visibility is the involvement of automation and technology. And this certainly goes much beyond the idea of track and trace functionality. So what we can see in regards to visibility is that it's really a prerequisite for supply chain agility and responsiveness. As before a company can really benefit from any reductions in inventory and landed costs, it needs visibility into the supply chain itself. And only then can it apply its tools to agilely adapt to the information it collects and works towards an above-average performance regardless of global complexity. Now, the Aberdeen Group go on to say, and this is based on research of firms with global supply chains, 2/3 of the respondents, so almost 70%, indicated that supply chain visibility as having has a high priority for improvement. In other words, there's more work to do in this particular area. And according to the study, the main pressures that's impacting on this visibility are all interconnected. And the first one is the increasing supply chain complexity. So we're talking about longer lead times due to extended cycle times, lead time variability, or simply due to increasing number of suppliers, carriers, customers, and logistics channels. Now, all these factors contribute to a requirement to maintain larger industry buffers to compensate for these uncertainties, which are created in regard to meeting supply deadlines. The other impact and the interconnectedness is that rising supply chain management costs, such as landed costs, fuel costs, labour costs, which can result in budget overruns, are generally a consequence of increased inventory carrying costs. So as a result of having to keep those due to the complexities to have an increased inventory carrying cost or the usage of premium freight expenses to ensure a timely delivery. So instead of using perhaps a sea movement, the business might find itself in a position of having to use an air movement. And the final pressure impacting on supply chain visibility are rising supply chain management costs. Demand versus supply imbalances. And this relates to issues where spikes of demand are unable to be met with the current supply chain procedures in place. So I guess it represents the company not being agile enough to be able to respond to those spikes in demand. Now, according to its research, the Aberdeen Group states that shippers and freight forwarders are dealing with these external pressures impacting supply chain visibility by pursuing a number of strategies. Now, the first strategy that they're implementing is improving internal collaboration. Now, this is aimed at synchronizing data across various management systems and internal groups. And it's particularly important as the level of external collaboration grows and is more relevant as the degree of overseas outsourcing or sourcing also grows. Another strategy that's being used is seeking to achieve higher levels of control and coordination with external parties they depend on, such as freight forwarders. So it's the freight forwarder and their client developing closer ties and ensuring a continuous evaluation of logistics services efficiency. And finally, the final strategy to alleviate the pressures of supply chain complexity requires implementation of more seamless systems and process flows designed to improve timeliness and accuracy of data exchange about supply chain transactions. So that's all I really wanted to highlight in regard to supply chain visibility. But as you can see, it presents a real opportunity for freight forwarders to develop relationships with their clients and impact positively on the bottom line for their clients. So the questions that we looked at, our focus questions that I was discussing today is, what is trade facilitation and what is its relevance to supply chains, customs activities and the WCO, World Customs Organization? Why is supply chain security important to businesses, freight forwarders and government? What is the layered approach to border and supply chain security? And finally, what is supply chain visibility and why is it important to shippers and forwarders? So, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Bye for now.